What up, guys? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. That Thursday night game sucked a lot, but it was football, and football is good, right? Think so. Unless you started Scott Miller, in which case football is terrible, fantasy football is awful, and you should just go delete your team. Um, gotta love it. You gotta love the ebb and flow and the randomness of this stupid game that we're so addicted to that you can have great feeling about a guy. They just completely light your matchup on fire by throwing a dud out there. It's great. It's great. But hopefully we can avoid more of those landmines. We didn't necessarily recommend Miller, but definitely I had him in a lineup in a deeper league where it's just that it's just going to crap already. But hopefully we can turn things around. We're a little more information on the now Tuesday night game between the Bills and the Titans. We're not sure if that one's even going to happen at this point. We need to see consecutive days of no positive tests from the Titans, but after multiple days in a row with one or two new positive cases, it might be a very difficult mountain for them to climb. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm desperate to get the Titans back into our lineups. Guys like Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown, way too much exposure to them, and I'm getting very frustrated with the lack of protocol following that the Titans had. At this point, if this game doesn't go, the NFL could actually take some pretty serious action to lay the groundwork to show that they're not going to put up with this crap, to put it nicely, of the Titans not following protocol. So we'll see. Fingers crossed, got a few hours before we get any reports back about potential positive or negative cases. So hopefully the Titans have finally locked things down and we don't see any more positive cases. That game could be very interesting. I'm not sure how prepared they're going to be. It sounds like they've been practicing against the NFL's rules. So hopefully they'll still be prepared and it will be a fun game to watch. But I'm just hoping there is a game. We'll see. We should know by tomorrow, really. Tomorrow or Saturday. If there's 2 days in a row of negative tests, I doubt we'll go Friday, Saturday with no positive cases, and then all of a sudden it'll pop up on Sunday. But of course, that's still a possibility. I would just venture to guess if we're going to see any more positive cases pop up in Tennessee, it's going to happen tomorrow. So we already talked about that game, so we're not going to talk about them again tonight, even though technically they are now on the late game slate. So that game that we were talking about, no longer at 11 a.m., currently scheduled for Tuesday night. Tuesday night football would be pretty interesting to see, so cool. If it happens, I'm happy with it. And then the Broncos-Patriots game moved up to Monday night as well, with Stephon Gilmore contracting COVID. No other positive cases in New England that I am aware of, so it seems like that game is probably going to be set to go, but they're just taking caution there and making sure that they have... I guess it's just making sure that they don't have any more positive cases, which is a fine thing. I don't mind that at all. But anyway, we're going to go through each of these games that we haven't talked about yet, talk about their over-unders, talk about the best fantasy starts and sits in each one. And we will begin with the Miami Dolphins versus the San Francisco 49ers. Looks like the 49ers are set to get back a few of their key playmakers this week. Jimmy Garoppolo and Raheem Mostert both practicing on the week. Dolphins relatively healthy across the board. Doesn't look like this is going to be much of a competition, though. Dolphins traveling from Miami all the way to the Bay, and that doesn't typically bode well when you have to travel from coast to coast in either direction. So we'll see how this game ends up going. I'm hoping for some more fantasy points here. Vegas is positive that this one will be a good high-scoring game, a 51.5 over-under. 49ers heavy favorites here, -9 spread. 49ers on defense, even considering the losses that they've sustained with Richard Sherman and Bosa going down, Solomon going down, like they've lost a lot of pieces, and yet they've continued to be a really dominant defense, which I think that just goes to show like how well run this team is right now from a coaching perspective. So 49ers have been really good at slowing down. They've been the best team against the run, the second best team against tight ends, and they've been above average against quarterbacks and receivers. So that is definitely going to depress some of the fantasy options here on the Dolphins side, whereas the Dolphins have been a salve across the board. Number 6 in terms of points allowed for quarterbacks, number 7 for running backs, number 7 for wide receivers. They've been decent at stopping tight ends, but they haven't faced any real good tight ends as of now, so not worried about Kittle by any means, especially after he went nuclear on Sunday night. So this should be a pretty dominant game for the 49ers. We're just hoping the Dolphins have enough garbage time to make it worthwhile for you. Pretty much for me, though, I'm nervous. I am nervous about starting anyone here outside of Devontae Parker. Devontae Parker is a beast. If we saw DeAndre Hopkins was the only receiver to have a pretty good game against the 49ers, but I think Parker could have a pretty good game in this one. I guess you could talk me into starting Gaskin if this ends up being a route where the 49ers are just up by a ton of points. They could end up throwing a lot of check down passes to Myles Gaskin. Mike Gesicki, he's just disappointed every week except for one. He's been a pretty big disappointment on the season for me. After we were, pretty high on him, we might have to basically table him until we see what Tua ends up doing when Tua takes over. This could be the last game for Ryan Fitzpatrick. If he comes out and has another dud performance against this tough 49ers defense, we might be seeing Tua in week 6. So keep that in mind. And I mean, that could even potentially happen mid-game. But the only starter on the Dolphins side that I'm feeling comfortable with is Devontae Parker. On the 49ers side, regardless of whether or not Raheem Mostert is active, you're playing Jerick McKinnon. He's looked great. He's scored a touchdown in every single game up to this point. And even if that doesn't continue, he has been their best running back. Raheem Mostert as well, coming back potentially. He's practicing in a limited fashion right now, so it's looking positive for him to come back, but going to have to monitor that practice report. If he plays, I'm playing him. The Dolphins' run defense has been pretty bad, so I'm not really too concerned. Even if he only gets a limited workload, I think he gets enough go to have a good fantasy day. Of course, you're starting George Kittle. The 49ers defense are one of the better plays on the week. And where it gets more interesting is, are you going to start Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk? Depending on your league format, I think there's definitely room to negotiate them in. We saw Deebo Samuel barely play last week. They're going to continue to ease him back into the role that he had last year, trying to avoid any re-injuries to that foot. And then Brandon Ayuk has looked basically the same part that what they were playing with Deebo Samuel. So I am concerned with how the touch share is going to go between these guys. It could end up being a situation where one guy's good one week and the other guy completely duds you, and they trade off back and forth. So for me, until we see what this usage looks like, we see if Jimmy Garoppolo is even playing this week, I would really want to know, though, like once Deebo is fully healthy, what does that look like? Are they actually using both of these guys consistently? Is it going to go back and forth? Hopefully by this point, you're not reliant on either Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk. I think this is going to be kind of a trap shootout kind of game. I'm expecting a lower score than Vegas is anticipating. So I'm trying to avoid putting either Deebo or Brandon Ayuk into my lineup if I can avoid it. No one else on the 49ers side that we're starting. Isaiah Ford, Preston Williams, we're not touching them on the Dolphins side. Again, pretty nervous about this Dolphins team. Ryan Fitzpatrick has performed pretty poorly in the past when he's had a rookie nipping at his heels. He's typically a quarterback that is better at taking over later in the year rather than a guy that starts out. So we've already seen the cracks coming through for him. This could be a pretty poor performance against the 49ers. So wait and see. Parker's the only guy I'm really comfortable starting there. And as we said, I'm expecting this to be a blowout. So I think the Dolphins will lose this one pretty decisively. I got the 49ers 31 to the Dolphins 20. But even that, I feel like, is a little bit too much for me. So we'll see. I think that the 49ers win this one pretty easily. I think there could be some defensive scoring here, which is why I have the score kind of higher. I think that's kind of what Vegas is thinking as well. Look for there to potentially be like a pick six or a fumble recovery there. But overall, 49ers should win this one pretty handedly. Jumping over and talking about the New York Giants and the Dallas Cowboys, the most pathetic division in the NFL right now, the NFC East. We've got the division-leading Dallas Cowboys, the 1-3 Dallas Cowboys. It's crazy. Well, I guess technically the Eagles are winning now, right? Because they're 1-2-1. So the Eagles are the division leaders. Cowboys trying to get back into it, playing against the 0-4 Giants. Giants have looked terrible up to this point, but they have faced a pretty tough schedule, whereas the Cowboys have looked great on offense, but their defense has been complete garbage. So it should be a pretty interesting game. Got a 54-point over-under here, second highest on the week. Implied point total is Cowboys 31, Giants 23, with the Cowboys favored by 8.5 at home. I understand that pretty easily why that would be the lean here, even though the Cowboys have, I think someone had said that they've only led on 7 snaps, like they've only taken a snap on 7 snaps where they were in the lead. So the Cowboys have really struggled at getting into the lead early and holding it. Obviously, they've been playing catch up over the past couple weeks. They were able to sneak out that miraculous win against Atlanta, but with the exception of Atlanta just completely caving, this would be a winless Cowboys team as well, even though Dak Prescott is on track to throw over 6,000 yards at this point. So I think this is a game where the Cowboys can kind of get things right. Hopefully they can, finally put one together. But I do think the Giants, you should not sleep on them. Yes, they have been bad on offense, but going against the Cowboys, I think that will be the cure that ails all woes there. So this should be a pretty good fantasy game. I'm interested in a lot of the players here. So on the Giants side, I think Darius Slayton and Golden Tate both become really interesting wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 options. Darius Slayton obviously with the higher upside, whereas Golden Tate with the higher floor, but both of them should have a good game. And this should hopefully be the game that we've been hoping that Evan Ingram would break out. We saw him put up a pretty big game against the Cowboys in week 1 last year, and I'm expecting good things from him here again. Cowboys have not been able to really slow anyone down in a passing game. Not touching either of the running or any of the running backs here, and Daniel Jones would only be like an emergency spot start if you lost a quarterback, or like if they cancel the Titans-Bills game and you need someone quickly, you could pivot to a guy like Daniel Jones. I think I have him ranked around 16th right now. So there's much better options probably out there on the waiver wire, but if not, someone that you could definitely consider in this option that's most likely on the waiver wire at this point. On the Cowboys side, this one, we're just throwing everybody out there. We're going to do this pretty much every week until they show us otherwise. Dak has been the leading quarterback in terms of fantasy points. You're starting Zeke every week. Amari Cooper is the leading PPR receiver. CeeDee Lamb definitely up there as well. Michael Gallup, I guess, is the one that you might have to have some pause with, but he's still seeing high leverage targets. He's still seeing a lot of the air yards there in Dallas. So it's just a matter of him actually having a good matchup and a good opponent where he's not getting shadowed too much and honestly just getting used. So I'm confident in Michael Gallup this week. And, if you're not confident beyond this game, I think you can play him this week and then you can try to shop him and sell him. But I know a lot of people are even dumping him to their waiver wire. So if you see him on the waiver wire, I think you can scoop him up and play him this week. Dalton Schultz has been one of the better tight ends on the year. Go figure. Poor Blake Jarwin fans. I know Jarwin was going to have a really good year because Schultz is not as good as Jarwin, and he's still having a really good season. So you're starting all these guys. I think you can even start the Cowboys defense in this one, even if the Giants put up some points. They're probably going to turn the ball over some. Not jamming them into your lineup, but someone you can consider if you need a spot start. And those are the only guys we're starting on the Cowboys side. Like I said, I think the Cowboys can win this one. I had them winning 34-27, so it should be a pretty profitable fantasy output for both of these teams. All right, one of the more interesting games on this week is the game between the Indianapolis Colts and the Cleveland Browns. Indianapolis Colts and Cleveland Browns are both 3-1. Colts have arguably the best defense in the league right now. I don't really know whether that's more a product of who they played at this point or if they really are just that stinking good. This will be a really good litmus test for where they stand as a defense, because the Browns offense, after that week 1 just flat out bad performance, they've been really hot on offense. They've been the number 1 running team in the league, and Baker Mayfield has looked capable in the passing game. So we'll see, immovable object and unstoppable force meeting each other here. Which one is real? If the Browns win this game, then I think that's pretty eye-opening and showing that they really are for real. Whereas if they just don't show up, then going back to being Cleveland. But Vegas is obviously very conflicted on this one as well. They, as of today, looking at the lines, the spread is even. So right now there's an over-under of 47, and it's basically a pick 'em at this point. So I'm pretty conflicted in my choice here, between the Colts and the Browns. We saw the Colts, underperform defensively against the Jaguars, but other than that, their defense has been great. Completely shut down the Vikings, completely shut down the Bears last week. So can their defense do that again? They've been great. They are the best team against quarterbacks, best team against tight ends. They are the fourth best team against running backs, and above average against receivers. Whereas the Browns have actually allowed a lot of fantasy points to quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends. A little bit stronger against the running back with that good front seven, but don't think that means we're going to be stopping playing Jonathan Taylor at all. His schedule is about to ease up, and you can't really keep a guy like that on your bench. He has the propensity to blow up at any moment. His day is coming. So with that being said, there's not a lot of people I'm comfortable starting in this game. I think this will be a low-scoring output again. We saw that last week with the Colts and the Bears. I think this will be a similar game script between them. I mean, obviously, it could turn into a shootout if either of these teams starts off hot, but I don't really trust... I have Mayfield on the wrong side again. Sorry, guys. Let me fix that real quick. Don't know how I always do this, but I always do this. All right. I get dyslexic sometimes when I'm typing these up. See, and I even have Hooper over here. What the crap am I doing? Sorry, guys. I got Cox over here. It's late. This is what happens when I work on things too late. My apologies. This will be edited out for the video tomorrow. Okay, let's get back on track. So there's not a lot of guys I really like starting in this game, to be honest. I think this will be a game script similar to what we saw between the Colts and the Bears last week. Should be a lower scoring game. There is a chance that this game turns into a higher scoring affair, but I'm not counting on it. I'm not really banking on Phillip Rivers. He looks pretty washed at this point, and Baker Mayfield definitely looked okay last week, but the Colts defense is much stronger than the Cowboys. So this could be a very low scoring game. That being said, Kareem Hunt and Jonathan Taylor are every week starters, so we're starting both of them. The Colts defense has been arguably the best in the league, so we're going to continue to roll them out there. And it's really hard to put the genie back in the bottle with Odell Beckham after he's had 3 solid weeks in a row now. I'm definitely comfortable playing Odell Beckham in pretty much any circumstance. Where it starts getting murky is everybody else. So Nyheim Hines, at this point, I'm really only comfortable starting Nyheim Hines if we see this defense kind of flounder a little bit and they're actually showing that they need to put up some more points. And Nyheim Hines has been barely involved in this offense, and honestly, I don't think they've trailed since week 1. So Nyheim Hines is definitely seeing the treatment that you would expect a satellite back to get for a team that has a really good defense. So you can't really trust him unless you think that it's actually going to be a high-scoring game, which I don't. T.Y. Hilton and Zach Pascal. Zach Pascal seeing more of the targets last week. I still think T.Y. Hilton is probably going to end up having a good game at some point, but I don't know that this is the week. Yes, the Browns' defense has been bad. I just don't trust Phillip Rivers that much at this point. So probably not throwing either guy out there. Watch T.Y. Hilton have his massive blow-up game because I told you guys to finally bench him, but that's just how fantasy football works. So if you believe in that sort of thing, go ahead and start him because I told you not to. And then you might have to start Mo Alley-Cox just based on what your tight end situation is, but he's been pretty... he hasn't been very involved, even though he's been involved in high-leverage plays. So if you start him, you're basically hoping for a touchdown like you got last week. On the Browns side... I don't really think that Dearness Johnson is someone that we should be throwing out into our lineups until we really see how this touch split goes. We saw the snap share between Dearness Johnson and Jontrell Hilliard. It was basically even after Nick Chubb left that game, but this is going to be a Kareem Hunt show. There's a tough defense against the Colts, so we're not going to play a secondary option in the running game outside of Hunt against a tough defense. So if Dearness Johnson comes out and has another good game and he does it on your bench, bravo, you have a good starter going forward. If he can do that against the Colts, he can do that against anybody, but I'm not trusting him this week by any means. Jarvis Landry has been really disappointing up to this point. We were hoping that last week he would have had a breakout game, but if it wasn't for that touchdown play to Odell Beckham on that trick play, he would have had another really poor performance for fantasy. So I'm keeping him on my bench until he actually does something for us. Hooper, maybe you might be forced into starting him, but he had the touchdown last week, had a couple of catches, but still hasn't been very involved in this offense. It's a really low pass volume offense in general. So you could start the Browns defense as well, even though they haven't done much for fantasy. I could definitely talk myself into that because I think this will be a lower scoring game. That being said, I think the Browns can win this one. I do believe in the Browns. I think the Browns are actually better than a lot of people are wanting to believe that they are just because they're the Browns. But I don't necessarily believe in the Colts offense at this point. They need to get some things together. Phillip Rivers needs to actually throw the ball a bit more. So I think this could be one where they kind of let slip away from them near the end of the game. I got the Browns winning this one 20-17. Ooh. Okay, I think this is my favorite game on the week, at least in terms of fantasy output, because it's pretty easy to talk about who we're going to start in this one. We got the Vikings and the Seahawks. This one is in Seattle, 4-0 Seahawks versus the 1-3 Vikings. Seattle Seahawks have had one of the more prolific offenses on the year, whereas the Vikings defense has been terrible. On the flip side, the Vikings offense hasn't been the greatest, but Dalvin Cook has been fantastic, and they've been getting things together in the passing game over the past couple weeks, and the Seattle Seahawks defense has been terrible as well. So it should be a really good fantasy game. We've got a 57-point over-under. Seahawks are favored to win this one by 7. When we look at defenses here, the Vikings have been average against quarterbacks, giving up the 12th most to running backs and the 4th most to receivers. But the Seahawks, not to be outdone, are giving up the most points to receivers and the 2nd most points to opposing quarterbacks. They've been decent at stopping running backs. I'm not sure whether that's more of a product of the fact that they've always been leading and the other team has had to abandon the run, or necessarily what that is, but I'm not nervous about starting Dalvin Cook for what it's worth. So that being said, this is going to be a really good game for fantasy. Fingers crossed that it actually turns into a shootout. I think it will. I think the Vikings can actually hang with the Seahawks, although I don't project them to win. That being said, we're starting Dalvin Cook, we're starting Adam Thielen, and definitely going to give you the nod to start Justin Jefferson after 2 straight weeks of good performances on the real football field. Definitely someone that you want to be starting in your fantasy lineups. You could talk me into starting Kirk Cousins, but his potential to melt down is definitely something that I'm nervous about. So maybe there's a better option out there for you. And then Alexander Mattison did end up getting into the end zone last week, but I'm not going to be chasing touchdowns at this point. He's an emergency what the heck flex, not someone I'm jamming into my lineup unless I have to. Not starting the tight ends here. Definitely not starting either defense on either side. This is going to be a high-scoring game. You don't want defenses here. On the Seahawks side, it's easy. We're starting Russell Wilson. We're starting Chris Carson. We're starting DK Metcalf. We're starting Tyler Lockett. Maybe the question then becomes, do you start any of the tight ends here? You could start Greg Olsen if you want to. He hasn't been involved enough to really show that consistency. So if you have a better option, someone that you think has a better chance at actually going and scoring, I just don't know what we can expect from Olsen on a week-by-week basis. And that's pretty much it. I'm not starting Travis Homer. He got the touchdown last week, but Chris Carson was heavily involved. We'll see what Carlos Hyde ends up looking like this week. He was inactive last week, healthy scratch. So maybe that's their vote of confidence that Chris Carson is fully back to health after recovering from that hip injury. So we'll see if Chris Carson continues playing the way that he has. Then he was definitely undervalued and should have been drafted higher than he was. But at this point, it's pretty easy who you're starting in this one. Don't talk yourself out of this. You want to play players in this game. Both of these defenses are terrible against the pass, and you want to see this turn into a shootout, and I think it will. Overall, I have the Seahawks winning this one pretty decisively. I have the Seahawks winning 35-27 for Minnesota. All right, we got a question from William over here. You're just asking, I believe, who you're starting. We got Joe Mixon, OBJ, or Deontay Johnson. Mixon plays Baltimore, OBJ plays Indy, and Deontay plays the Eagles. Honestly, all three of those defenses have been decent against receivers. I'd have to check my rankings. I think I have Odell Beckham above Deontay Johnson, but it would be between those guys for me. Although it's really hard to bench Joe Mixon after the way he just played. So maybe don't be too risky here. We did see that Antonio Gibson was able to put together a good performance against the Baltimore Ravens. So while I don't think there's any way you can expect Joe Mixon to have another 40-point game, you're going to go with the volume here. You know there's guaranteed volume with a running back, whereas with Odell Beckham and Deontay Johnson, it could go somewhere else this week. So I guess between those three, I would play Mixon, but the fact that you have to flex one of those guys means that the rest of your lineup is probably pretty strong. So this is probably going to be the least of your worries. Okay, so we're going to talk about the early Monday night game that got moved up, the Broncos versus the Patriots. So I have a weird theory. I have no idea whether there's any truth to this at all, so don't take it as gospel for fantasy purposes. But I feel like the Patriots are trying to prolong this so that way they have a chance of getting Cam back. Cam has been asymptomatic after testing positive for COVID last week, and if he ends up going 10 days without showing any symptoms, then he can actually be taken off. So I think the Patriots are hoping that maybe Cam can become active. But again, that's just my speculation at this point. You have to expect that this is going to be Jarrett Stidham versus Brett Ripien. So not a game that you're really going to want to be starting any fantasy players in this one. And don't really need to take the risk anyway at that point because of the fact that this game could technically be canceled if someone else tests positive. I don't think that's going to happen, but we'll see. The Vegas lines were frozen when we checked earlier, so there's no over-under at this point. The Patriots are favored to win by 8. That's the only thing that we have. Patriots have actually not been as good against the receivers as they were previously. They have been good at stopping the run, whereas the Broncos have also been really good at stopping the run and have been a salve for wide receivers. They're giving up the 5th most points to receivers and 8th most points to quarterbacks. But it really doesn't matter because if it's Jarrett Stidham, I don't trust anyone here. Now, again, if Cam Newton does miraculously play, then I'm playing Cam, I'm playing Edelman, I'm playing White like I normally would. But assuming he doesn't play, I feel like the only Patriot I'm even halfway comfortable with starting is Julian Edelman, even though I guess you could talk me into playing Damian Harris or James White. Like, if you're hurting at running back, you're probably having to play those guys anyway. I don't really know what this is going to look like. The Broncos have a good run defense. Maybe James White ends up being the better option there because he's used primarily out of the passing game, whereas Damian Harris didn't see any targets last week, but he was used heavily on the ground, so maybe he's the worst play this week. It's just a mess in New England right now. Hopefully they get Cam back soon, but definitely playing the Patriots defense here. We saw Brett Ripien throw 3 interceptions last week. I believe it was 3 interceptions. I know at least one of those was for a pick 6, so see if the Patriots can do that again, even without Stephon Gilmore. They're still pretty strong all around. The other guys here, N'Keal Harry, Damian Byrd, or Damiere Byrd. Hopefully you don't have to play either of those guys, but I guess N'Keal Harry did get the touchdown last week, so if you're chasing touchdowns, you can go that route. I'm just not going to recommend doing that. On the Broncos side, I think you can still start Melvin Gordon. He's used enough in the passing game as well, and he was able to, put up a really good fantasy performance last week, and then Jerry Jeudy just looked really good. So I'm not going to chase the points with Tim Patrick here going against the Patriots defense. I just don't know how many points are going to be scored in this one. I imagine that this is going to be a really low scoring game where you're probably not going to be too happy with any of the fantasy assets that you're putting out there. So probably going to try to avoid as many players in this game as physically possible. I have the Patriots winning this one 17-10. So Broncos covering the spread, but a really low scoring affair where you're not very happy with any of the fantasy output. Again, this is assuming Cam does not play. So let's talk about the final game between the Los Angeles Chargers and the New Orleans Saints. At least at this point in time, it is looking like Michael Thomas will finally make his return after suffering the high ankle sprain at the end of week 1. Hopefully he has taken enough time to actually come back and be productive. We'll see. He's practicing limited all week, so I'm not necessarily that enthralled with him coming back and playing against the Chargers, but we did see Mike Evans have a good week last week, and I don't think the Saints at this point are rushing him back because they've still been able to be competitive without him. So that being said, let's get into it and let's talk about it. 50.5 over under. I think that's a little ambitious for Vegas to be putting this up there, but the Saints have continued to score points. And Justin Herbert has been really good, so maybe I'm wrong. I just feel like this is going to end up being a fake shootout. But the Chargers have been pretty poor at slowing down quarterbacks. They've been better against the run, but allowing the 15th most points to receivers and tight ends, whereas the Saints have been really bad at slowing down quarterbacks, but mainly through the tight end position. So this is going to be a great week to spot start Hunter Henry. The Saints have just been defeated by tight ends over and over and over again, week in and week out. That has been their true weakness here. So I think Hunter Henry is going to be a really good play this week, whereas, we'll talk about Josh Kelly in a second. Let's go through it. So on the Chargers side, you're starting Keenan Allen every single week. He's locked and loaded. I don't care about the matchup. I don't care if Marshawn Lattimore is playing again. Keenan Allen is getting hyper targeted by Justin Herbert right now, and he should, even if he doesn't have the greatest of games, he'll still have a pretty decent shot at putting up some good points. As we mentioned, Hunter Henry is probably one of the better starts on the week playing against this defense that has not been able to stop tight ends in any fashion this season. On the running back side, I'm tempted to say you can start Josh Kelly, but the Saints have been really good at stopping the running backs this year. And Josh Kelly is very limited in the passing game. Justin Jackson is probably going to end up seeing more of the passing work than Josh Kelly does. So I'm not really excited about starting either running back in this one. If you have to, I guess I would take Kelly over Jackson just for the guaranteed volume, but it's really hard to trust anyone here. So I'm pretty much only starting Allen and Henry. As I said, I feel like this is kind of a trap game in terms of the over-under. I feel like it's definitely going to hit the under. Drew Brees, you can start him with Kamara and Thomas coming back. He's still been productive even though he's noodle-armed everything. Doesn't matter. He's still been productive for fantasy, so he's going to be probably a top 12 option on the week. Alvin Kamara is the best running back in the league right now for fantasy and will continue to do so as long as he's seeing the target share that he has been. And hopefully he does not see Latavius Murray vulture more of his touchdowns this week. If you've been waiting for Michael Thomas to come back, I don't think you have an option to wait for him another week. If you do, I guess I could see you talking yourself out of playing him, but I think he's going to be used enough to have a pretty decent showing here. And again, the fact that they've kept him out for 3 weeks, I think he'll end up being pretty effective when he does come back. So I'm starting Kamara and Thomas here. We'll start the Saints defense because I feel like this is a game where the Saints just kind of remind you that Justin Herbert is still a rookie. So I would play their defense in this one. Latavius Murray, I'm not going to chase the touchdowns. He didn't see enough volume to really warrant throwing him back out there in your lineup. I guess the real question is between Emmanuel Sanders and Traquan Smith. It depends on how much they end up using Michael Thomas this week. One of these guys will probably have a good game, but as we've seen historically with the Saints in the past, when Kamara and Thomas are healthy, it's really hard to predict who else is going to see the targets there. So it's pretty much a punt and a prayer at this point for either Emmanuel Sanders or Traquan Smith. If you have to go with either, I guess I would go with Sanders, but both are like mediocre wide receiver 4 options this week. Overall, as I mentioned, I feel like this one is going to hit the under. I got the Saints winning this one 28-17 over the Chargers. And that is my final prediction on the week. With the exception of Thursday night games, which we've been terrible in, we've been really good in terms of our money line predictions. Have been very accurate at this point. So hopefully we'll have another good week on that one. But with that being said, we are done going through all of the lineups here. So hopefully this helped you guys. We'll chop this up if you guys missed any of the stream so you can see all these individual ones when we post them up tomorrow. When I trade Evans, for who, I guess is the question. He hasn't been giving you the 40-point games, but he's still been a top 12 option every week. He's been scoring touchdowns like nobody's business, and he's been Brady's favorite option in the red zone. I guess once Godwin comes back, you can worry about him potentially not seeing as much volume, but his schedule is about to get a lot easier as well, so he's faced some pretty tough defenses the past 3 weeks, so I probably wouldn't be trading Evans unless you're getting a really good option there. Looks like you guys are going back and forth. So you have Lockett, McLaurin, and Higgins. Yeah, there's no reason for you to trade Evans unless you absolutely need to. But I would rather have Evans than Julio at this point. I do think Julio will come back at some point and be Julio again, but it might be 3 weeks until that happens. And at this point, I would rather just wait until the Julio owner is a bit more frustrated and you can potentially get him for cheaper. So that being said, I would probably keep Evans in that situation. So anyway, hope you guys found that helpful. Thank you guys for joining us. I'm tired, so I'm going to go to bed. But I hope you guys have a good night. Eckler should be on the IR. Just saw your comment right at the end there. I don't know why he's not. Sounds like that injury with his hamstring is really severe. So we'll probably get some more clarity on that by Saturday. But for some reason, they haven't made that move yet. If they don't, I'll be surprised. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next stream.